Fort Worth police made an arrest for a decades-old cold case thanks to DNA evidence from the murder and abduction of Carla Walker. Walker was 17 years old in February of 1974 when she was abducted from a bowling alley parking lot.
Well, Brian, it's an anonymous letter written and sent to police the same year that Carla died. It points to a potential suspect. Now police want to find who wrote it, hoping they'll have more evidence to finally solve a decades-old case.
A warning before we begin. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content some viewers may find deeply disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. On the most romantic night of the year, Valentine's Day, a 17-year-old girl was dragged out of a parked car while her boyfriend bled unconscious in the seat beside her. In the last moment before she disappeared into the dark, she spoke 4 words to him. He has carried those 4 words every single day for the past 52 years. 3 days later, her body was pulled from a culvert. The medical examiner confirmed she had been alive for 2 of those days. Beaten, tortured, raped, injected with morphine, and strangled to death. But here is the fact that should stop you cold. That same year, investigators sat across a table from the man who did it. He answered every question calmly. He agreed to a polygraph test without hesitation. The machine said he was telling the truth. They let him walk out the door. He drove home. He raised his children. He grew old. For 46 years, he lived less than a mile from the parking lot where he had left her, and nobody knew. In the next few minutes, you are going to learn exactly how a killer passed a lie detector test and walked free in 1974. You will learn why the case went cold for nearly 5 decades, what a single television network's $15,000 check changed, and how one phone call on the 4th of July, Independence Day, finally brought justice to a family that had been waiting more than half a lifetime. This story matters because the method used to catch this killer has since been used in cold cases all across the country. And because the law that exists today as a result of this case bears the name of a 17-year-old girl from Fort Worth who never got to see Texas Tech, who never got to marry her boyfriend, who never got to become the veterinarian her little brother always imagined she would be. Her name was Carla Jan Walker. And this is her story. Wow. Welcome back to Real Crime Chronicles, where every cold case has a name worth remembering. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. New here? Hit like and subscribe. It keeps us digging. Now back to Fort Worth. 1974. Carla Jan Walker was born January 31st, 1957 in Fort Worth, Texas, the 4th of 5 children raised by Leighton and Doris Walker. She was 17 years old, a junior at Western Hills High School, and the kind of person who made a room slightly warmer the moment she walked into it. 4 feet 11 inches tall. A thick mane of honey blonde hair, 110 pounds. Her family had one word for her: Spitfire. Fiery, stubborn, utterly certain of who she was. At 15, she told her parents she wanted a brand new Monte Carlo for her birthday. When they said no, she told them she didn't want anything else. They got her the Monte Carlo. She was a cheerleader and a tennis player. She smiled at everyone she passed in the corridor by name, and somehow was still the person who took up the most space in a room. Not loudly, but completely. Her younger brother Jim thought she would become a veterinarian. Her boyfriend Rodney McCoy had already given her a promise ring. They talked about Texas Tech, both of them, together, after graduation. She had no doubt about any of it. February 17th, 1974 was a Sunday. The Valentine's dance at Western Hills was the night Carla and Rodney had been looking forward to all week. Rodney McCoy was 18 years old, the quarterback of the Western Hills football team. For the Valentine's dance, he borrowed his mother's Ford LTD, cleaned it up, and drove to the Walker house to pick Carla up. The dance was everything it was supposed to be. Afterward, they were not ready for the evening to end. They cruised the main boulevard the way Fort Worth teenagers did in 1974, windows down, no particular destination. Rodney said later, "I was having such a good time, I didn't even care what time it was." The last stop was the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, a neighborhood bowling alley. Familiar. Close by. Carla needed to use the restroom before heading home. The parking lot was empty when they pulled in, and neither of them had any reason to notice any intending harm. Then the passenger door flew open. A man was standing outside with a gun leveled at Rodney's face. He threatened to kill him. Before Rodney could process what was happening, something struck him across the head, and the world went dark. In the last moment before he lost consciousness, he heard her voice. "Rodney, go get my dad." Not a scream, not panic, a direction. 4 words from a 17-year-old still trying to find a way out of something there was no way out of. Then silence. He was alone in the parking lot of a bowling alley on Valentine's night, blood running down his face, and Carla Walker was gone. Rodney drove straight to the Walkers' house around 1 o'clock a.m. Less than a mile away, and did not park. He drove over the curb onto the front lawn and slammed the brakes. Inside, Leighton and Doris Walker were still awake, playing dominoes in the dining room with relatives. Their son Jim, 12 years old, was in the living room watching television. Their eldest daughter Cindy, 18, was beside him. Someone pounded on the front door. They opened it and found Rodney, blood soaking his face and shirt, barely coherent. He grabbed the doorframe and said, "Mr. Walker, they've got her. They're going to hurt her bad." Leighton Walker was a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. He did not wait. He grabbed his pistol and drove to the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl in the dark. Doris picked up the rotary phone and called the police. There was no sign of Carla at the bowling alley, only her purse on the ground near the car, and beside it, 22 Ruger magazine clip that had fallen from the attacker's weapon during the struggle. Fort Worth Police Department took over the scene and began working outward. Hospitals, witnesses, surrounding streets, anyone who had been near the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl that night. They contacted departments in neighboring counties. There was nothing. 3 days passed, each one heavier than the last. The Walker family lived in that suspended state that has no name. Not grieving yet, because grieving requires certainty, but unable to breathe. Every morning during those 3 days, Doris Walker walked to Carla's photograph and said good morning to it. She would do the same thing every remaining morning of her life. Jim Walker, 12 years old, waited. He had no framework for what was happening, no adult language, no precedent. No category for a sister who had gone out one night and simply did not come back. He would not find the words for it until 47 years later, standing in a courtroom. On February 20th, 1974, Carla Jan Walker's body was found in a culvert on Pearl Ranch Road near Benbrook Lake, 30 minutes south of Fort Worth. She was still wearing her dress from Valentine's night. The medical examiner's report was plain. She had been alive for 2 days after the abduction. In those 2 days, beaten, tortured, raped, injected with morphine, strangled to death. While her family searched, while Jim waited. While Leighton drove to every parking lot he could reach in the dark, 2 of those 3 days, she was still breathing. At the scene and during the autopsy, investigators collected Carla's clothing and biological samples, evidence they knew could contain the attacker's DNA. They knew what they had. They also knew what 1974 meant. No database to compare against, no method to convert biological material into a name. The samples were logged, bagged, and stored in the Fort Worth PD evidence room, where they would sit for the next 46 years. What they could work with immediately was the magazine clip, a specific caliber, a specific weapon, traceable to a purchase record. Investigators ran .22 Ruger sales across Fort Worth. One name stood out immediately, a man who had purchased the weapon recently, who lived less than a mile from the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, who held a prior criminal conviction, and who had been off work the day of the murder. His wife was out of town. They knocked on his door. His name was Glenn Samuel McCurley, 30 years old, truck driver, 1 prior conviction, car theft at 18. He was cooperative when investigators came calling. He had explanations for everything. The Ruger had been stolen from his truck 6 weeks before the murder. He hadn't reported it because, as a convicted felon, he had no interest in police attention. His wife had been visiting family in West Texas. He had been home alone. McCurley agreed to a lie detector test. He sat in the chair. He answered every question. The machine returned its verdict. He passed. His name was removed from the suspect list. He walked out of the station and returned to his life, his job, his house, less than a mile from the parking lot where he had left Carla Walker to die. What investigators did not know, February 17, 1974, was McCurley's 11th wedding anniversary. His wife and children were in West Texas. He had finished his shift at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon and had been drinking since then, whiskey and beer for hours, before driving around Fort Worth after dark. He watched his children grow up the way Carla's parents never would. He became, by all appearances, a decent neighbor. A woman once wrote a letter to the local paper praising him for returning her lost wallet. "The world needs more folks like this," she wrote. The machine had said he was honest. He was not. The case sat open on a shelf at Fort Worth PD. He grew old in the same city. Every case here is built from real records, real testimony, real lives. If the Carla Walker story is landing with you, take a second right now and hit like and subscribe. It keeps Real Crime Chronicles going. And now, back to the call that changed everything. Leighton Walker never stopped pushing. A retired Air Force officer confronted with the one problem that would not resolve. He and Doris lived with an open case and a portrait on the wall. Jim Walker grew from a 12-year-old boy into a man carrying what he later called silent anger, rage, not knowing who did this. He cooperated with every reporter who called and every investigator who knocked. He worked with what he had, which was only persistence and nothing else. Leighton died without ever hearing the name Glenn Samuel McCurley. Doris died without it too. Neither of them knew that the man who killed their daughter had never left Fort Worth, had likely passed them in traffic across the span of 46 years. Jim buried both of his parents without an answer. Rodney McCoy could not stay in the city. He moved to Alaska, far enough, cold enough, different enough that nothing reminded him of Fort Worth or Valentine's night or parking lots in the dark. He built a life there, married, had children, became by all outward appearances someone who had moved on. And he carried 4 words through all of it. Area 5. In April 2019, Fort Worth PD discovered an anonymous letter buried in the original case files, written in 1974. It read, "Kill Carla Walker in Benbrook." Signed not with a name, but with a sequence of binary numbers. Police posted it publicly for the first time in 45 years, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting or the thought pattern behind it. Jim Walker responded as he always had to any new development. "I feel the hand of God in this. This will be solved." He said something to somebody. Somebody's going to recognize that type of thought process and writing. And that's all we need is one phone call. The letter attracted attention. That attention slowly reached the right person. In April 2020, the Oxygen Network aired an episode of The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes, a cold case investigator who had helped identify the Golden State Killer 2 years earlier. The episode covered Carla's case. After it aired, Holes connected detectives Jeff Bennett and Leah Wagner with Othram, a private forensic DNA lab in the Woodlands, Texas, built specifically to work with degraded biological evidence that conventional laboratories could not process. The Oxygen Network funded the testing. Total cost $15,000. That is the dollar amount separating the Walker family from a 46-year answer. What the episode did not say, previous labs had nearly consumed what remained. CODIS, the National DNA Database, had found nothing. A Texas genealogy lab had found nothing. Each attempt had used a portion of the sample. By the time the evidence reached Othram, there was barely enough left for one final analysis. This was the last shot. Using genome sequencing technology developed for biomedical research, Othram rebuilt a complete DNA profile from what the other labs had left behind. They uploaded it to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database, and searched for familial relations. The search returned a result: a distant relative, a family tree, a surname. On the morning of July 4, 2020, Othram CEO David Middleman called Detective Jeff Bennett. He said, "We've connected the DNA to a particular family tree. The last name is McCurley." Bennett reached for his binder, the running record of every lead, every dead end, every name that had surfaced and faded across years of working the Walker case. He found the entry. He took a breath. He asked, "Is there anyone in that family named Glenn Samuel McCurley?" Middleman said he would check. He hung up. He called back. There was. Glenn Samuel McCurley Jr., Fort Worth, present at the time of the killing. Bennett said later, in testimony, "I felt like I was hearing something that detectives had wanted to hear for the past 46 years. The right suspect from 1974, cleared because a machine took his word for it, had just been found by a machine that did not. Genealogy alone was not enough to make an arrest. Investigators needed biological confirmation directly from McCurley. In July 2020, they collected his rubbish, bags left on the public street for collection. Rubbish on a public street carries no legal privacy protection. It went to the laboratory. The DNA from McCurley's rubbish matched the DNA from Carla's clothing. A 46-year-old crime scene and a discarded household bag, pointing at the same man. Investigators then approached McCurley directly and asked him to voluntarily provide a cheek swab. He agreed. The swab matched the rubbish. The swab matched Carla's clothing. 3 independent samples, 1 person. The probability that the biological material on Carla's clothing belonged to someone other than Glenn McCurley, 1 in 28 octillion. He was arrested on September 21, 2020. In the interrogation room, McCurley denied everything. He knew nothing. He had not been there. But question by question, the account began to shift. He talked about that night, Valentine's night, his 11th anniversary, alone, drinking since 4:30 in the afternoon. He drove around Fort Worth after dark, parked in several lots. He said he was just driving. Jim Walker, on hearing this, was not surprised. He is a narcissistic psychopath. Everything is always about him. I have to think that he got off work, started drinking, and started hunting for someone to do this on his 11th anniversary. Carla Walker was not chosen. She was not followed. She was in the wrong parking lot on the night this man decided to stop driving. After the denials, after the rationalizing, after the crying, the confession, I did do it, I guess, his stated reason for not releasing her. He was afraid she would report him. 5 words. 46 years in the making. When investigators searched McCurley's home, they looked for what he had claimed, 46 years earlier, had been stolen. The Ruger 22 was inside the house, not stolen, not discarded, hidden there, through the 1974 investigation, through the lie detector, through the deaths of Carla's parents, through Jim's 46 years of silence and rage and persistence. The gun had sat in that house the entire time. The machine had said he had been honest. The gun said otherwise. If this case has you gripped, and we think it does, pause right now and subscribe to Real Crime Chronicles. Hit the bell so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment. What moment in this story hit you hardest? We want to know. McCurley's trial opened in August 2021. He had pleaded not guilty. His defense argued the DNA evidence was flawed, the confession coerced. They described him as elderly and ill with cancer, a man who posed no threat. Prosecutors sought life in prison rather than the death penalty. Jury selection took a full day. Testimony ran through 2 more. On the morning of day 3, Judge Elizabeth Beach announced she had received documents in which Glenn Samuel McCurley confessed to the abduction and murder of Carla Jan Walker and wished to change his plea. She asked him on the record whether he understood that signing those documents meant surrendering his right to a jury verdict. 1 word: guilty. Carla's older sister, Cindy Stone, stood during the victim impact statement and spoke directly at McCurley, a man she had never laid eyes on before the trial, the man who had lived as their neighbor for 46 years without any of them knowing it. She did not use notes. You had choices. So many choices that night. You went out to kill someone. You had a gun. You had alcohol. I want to know if you did this to anyone else. Those families need to know. You have nothing left to lose. Rodney McCoy spoke from the weight of 5 decades. He hung a cloud of suspicion on me for all those years. That's torment. It's torment to live that. Jim Walker said one sentence that carried everything. A lot of healing happened in that courtroom, not just for me and my family, but for the whole community. And then he said something no one in that room expected. Something that said more about Jim Walker's character than anything else that had been spoken that day. He turned to face the man finally charged with his sister's death and said, "We're praying for you. We don't hate you. I would ask everybody to keep this gentleman and his family in their prayers." Judge Beach sentenced Glenn Samuel McCurley to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After sentencing, McCurley told reporters why he had changed his plea on day 3 of his own murder trial. Not guilt, not remorse, not what Cindy Stone had said. I have suffered enough. 47 years free. 2 days of trial. That was his accounting. That was the man who killed Carla Walker. They considered him a person of interest in at least 3 additional killings. McCurley denied it every time he was asked. I didn't kill any of those girls, not one of them. Cindy Stone had already asked the question from 3 feet away, looking directly at him. He gave her nothing. Glenn Samuel McCurley died in July 2023 at Telford Unit in Bowie County, Texas. Whatever he knew, he took it with him. At least 3 other families are still waiting for the moment Jim Walker described, standing in that courtroom, as finally, this case was resolved because a television network wrote a check for $15,000. Not because a government fund existed, not because the justice system found a mechanism, because a cable network decided this particular story was worth the cost of one episode. The case also made legal history. The forensic genetic genealogy method used by Othram survived a Daubert hearing, the American legal standard for scientific admissibility in court. It was among the first times this technique had cleared that threshold. The precedent has since helped investigators crack cold cases across the country. Senator John Cornyn of Texas then proposed the Carla Walker Act, federal legislation creating dedicated funding so law enforcement can access advanced DNA technology without depending on local budgets or media interest. Fort Worth's cold case unit carries close to 1,000 unsolved murders. The oldest dates to 1959. If you know anything about a cold case, a detail someone mentioned once and never explained, most police departments maintain anonymous tip lines. A call does not need to be certain to matter. The letter signed in binary code sat in a filing cabinet for 45 years because whoever wrote it stopped there. Don't be that person. If you want to do something with what you just heard, look up the Carla Walker Act, find out whether your representatives have supported it, contact them. Justice should not be contingent on what a television network decides to fund. That is not a political statement. It is a statement about what justice is supposed to mean. If you work in evidence storage or forensics at any level, keep everything. No one in 1974 knew that the fabric of a teenager's dress would still be speaking 46 years later. Technology does not expire. Evidence once destroyed does not come back. On the night of February 17, 1974, Carla Jan Walker said 4 words to the person she loved. "Rodney, go get my dad." 46 years later, the man who tore her out of that parking lot stood in a courtroom in Fort Worth and said 1 word: guilty. Justice arrived late and incomplete, because Cindy Stone's question is still out there, unanswered, in the cold silence McCurley left behind when he died. But for Carla Jan Walker, it arrived. If this case stayed with you, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment right now. Which moment hit hardest? The confession? The 4th of July phone call? Cindy Stone standing 3 feet from the man who destroyed her family and still asking, without notes, without a trembling voice, whether he had done it to anyone else. Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. We'll see you in the next case.